Okay. So you want to use this? Okay.
Just stick it out of there.
Okay.
Simple as that.
All right, good. Okay.
The photographer would like to get a picture with us. Is Joan Claybrook in the room? No, not yet. Okay. Hello, and welcome to the first evening forum at Cedar Lane. My name is Dick Coffinger, and I'm a co-chair of the team presenting tonight's speaker. The forum has enjoyed a very successful 15-year history in bringing highly informed, exciting, and challenging speakers. And they've made the forum an effective center of learning in the community. The speakers represent an incredibly wide range of subjects and issues. We've had Alice Rivlin on the national economy, Ed Mierzwinski from U.S. PIRG, and who worked with Elizabeth Warren to get the Consumer Financial Protection Agency approved, Aaron David Miller on the Middle East, Chris Van Hollen on national politics, and Neil Caporaso from the National Cancer Institute on cancer and genomics, among many, many others. The limiting factor we've had in reaching people in the community was the size of the venue and available parking, since the Sunday morning forums are held at 10 a.m. between the church services. Thus, we formed the evening forum to be held one Sunday each month. Upcoming Sunday morning forums are going to be Who's Stealing the Vote, with Jennifer Bevan Dangle, Executive Director of Common Cause Maryland. She'll be here on September 18th. And on September 25th, we have Dr. Lita Proctor, the coordinator of the NIH, Microbiome Project. Her talk will be on you, your microbiome, and your health. This fascinating new area of medical research offers implications for diabetes, autism, MS, obesity, the list goes on. The next forum, evening forum, is on October 16th. And it's going to be a really, really huge event with Mark Fisher, senior editor at the Washington Post. He'll be talking about his new bestseller, Trump Revealed, an American journey of ambition, ego, money, and power. And if you're interested in keeping informed on our future programs, please leave your email address on the Keep Me Informed sheets at the back of the room. There's clipboards on both sides. Thank you. Now, you know you're getting old, or in my wife's case, more mature, when you distinctly remember when a book came out and it was 50 years ago. Unsafe at Any Speed introduced Ralph Nader to the national scene, and he's never left. Every time you get into a modern car, you're safer because of his work. And that's just the early tip of his endeavors. He founded or inspired over 50 different groups and organizations. Best known is Public Citizen, but the others are still out there working for you. The Center for Auto Safety, the Center for Science in the Public Interest, Clean Water Action, and the many public interest research groups, to mention just a few. Nader has been responsible for at least 8 major consumer protection laws, such as the Motor Vehicle Safety Laws, the Safe Drinking Act, the Federal Information Act of 1974. He played a critical role in the launching of federal agencies such as OSHA, EPA, and the Consumer Product Safety Administration. In summation, Ralph has built an effective national network of citizen groups that have had a major impact in areas ranging from tax reform to nuclear energy to health and safety programs. The ultimate goal of this movement is to give citizens more rights and remedies for resolving grievances and for achieving a more just society. As the New York Times said, what sets Nader apart is that he has moved behind just social criticisms to effective political action. He's here today to reinforce the idea that a more just country can be ours and that it's easier than we think. Here's Ralph.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dick, for that introduction. Thank you for coming. And maybe we should thank the forebears who had the wisdom to start the Cedar Lane Universalist Unitarian Church. And because Unitarian churches are places where people show up. And the biggest problem in this country today is not that we don't have a lot of solutions, a lot of them are on the shelf, not that we don't have enough problems, but we don't have enough people showing up, not just to vote, to march, to demonstrate, to rally, to come to town meetings, to come to gatherings such as these, to come to living rooms to discuss where our neighborhood or society is heading. Now this is 9/11, 15th anniversary. You notice how widely it is celebrated, or commemorated rather. And we're very good about commemorating anniversaries of violent attacks against us. Pearl Harbor, 9/11, Boston Marathon, tragedy. But isn't it interesting that just 2 days ago, was the 50th anniversary of President Lyndon Johnson signing into law the Federal Motor Vehicle and Highway Safety Statutes, which irregularly enforced, nonetheless, have saved 3.5 million lives since 1966 and millions of injuries prevented or diminished in severity and hundreds of billions of dollars. Why is it we don't commemorate that date? You would think in their own self-interest, since the bill passed with the leadership of the Democrats in Congress, they would at least be able to remember one of their greatest achievements, and it was signed into law by a Democratic president. Now this reflects something seriously awry in our culture, and that is exemplified in many ways, that we spend a lot of money on things that are worthless or trivial, and we don't spend enough money on things that are absolutely critical and necessary. For example, after the criminal invasion of Iraq and the blowing apart of that country, we built the biggest embassy in the world. That embassy is guarded by contracts, and the last I heard, it cost $650 million to guard that embassy and its personnel a year. That is more than the entire budget of the Occupational Safety and Health Agency, which is supposed to deal with about 60,000 workplace-related deaths, disease, and trauma, as well as many other injuries. It is about 3.5 times the federal budget devoted to the auto safety standards and recall authority of the Department of Transportation. That's just one comparison. We seem never to be able to find money for the necessities of our country, like rebuilding the public works and public services. And while our schools are crumbling and bridges are hazardous and the public transit is greatly in need of modernization and expansion, we're spending trillions of dollars blowing apart infrastructure and human beings in about a dozen countries now that are not constitutionally authorized. Again, these are mostly illegal military attacks There was no declaration of war against Iraq, against Libya, against Afghanistan, and so on. So what does this come down to? It comes down to an amazing recognition throughout history that except for the Civil War, it never took more than 1% or less of the people becoming active and mobilizing to change things, as long as they represented majority opinion. It doesn't matter who is up against that 1%. It could be General Electric, General Motors, General Dynamics, Colonel Saunders, whatever. It doesn't matter if it's the Pentagon or the Department of Treasury. If 1% of the people or less spend 200 to 300 hours a year coordinated with each other in congressional districts, representing public sentiment, as Abraham Lincoln once said, they can turn Congress around. And if we can turn Congress around, the rest is downhill. Because Congress is the most powerful branch of our three branches of government. Constitutionally, they don't like to exercise it. They'd rather have the president initiate wars rather than they declare it. But there are only 535 of them. Let me repeat, there are only 535 of them. Why don't we control them? Why do 1,500 corporations, give or take, control over 2/3 or so of the members of Congress? They don't even have a vote. As Warren Buffett once said, we're 300 million people. Why can't we control 535 people on Capitol Hill? The answer is very simple. It's because we don't try. Because out there in the congressional districts, apart from single-issue people, like reproductive rights, gun control, etc., apart from single-issue people, the massive problems confronting the country, domestic and foreign, local and national, have almost no organized constituency among the voters. I can say this without even citing a study. There are more people hours spent by citizens in this country watching birds than watching Congress. And that's a very nice hobby, watching birds, healthy. Serious bird watchers elicit awe from me. They get up at dawn, they go into the marshes, they've got their pads, their pens, their cameras, and they're extremely communicative with other bird watchers because they're counting scores. Now, how many Congress watchers do we have? Well, let's throw around a few issues. The biggest budget in the United States is the Pentagon budget. It runs $650 billion to $800 billion, depending what you count. But it's about half of the federal government's operating expenditures. Half. And no more Soviet Union. Half. It is the only federal agency that is violating a 1992 federal law requiring it to submit to the U.S. Congress an audited statement of its expenditures. All other agencies and departments have to provide audits, or at least the material for the Government Accountability Office to conclude the audit. But the Government Accountability Office every year reports on the agencies to the Congress, 535 people, and concludes, we've looked over the Pentagon. The Pentagon has not supplied us with accounting data so we can understand how, when, where it spends its money. Now, this is not just a technical issue. Some of you may have heard a report years ago that in the first 9 months in Iraq, the Pentagon could not account for $9 billion with a B. The Air Force has been known to buy billions of dollars of spare parts because it doesn't know that it has those spare parts in some of its warehouses around the world. And of course, we've all heard of the Pentagon audits exposing all kinds of cost overruns and the misbehavior of the military contractors. Now, you would think that this would be of interest to some people in this country to the point where they at least organize a civic hobby in each congressional district watching the Pentagon so that it obeys federal law. Every Secretary of Defense said there should be an audit. Every chair of every relevant congressional committee says there should be an annual audit, but there isn't. Now, I was looking to see how many people in this country as citizens, you know, people do a lot of things in their spare time, right? I mean, they have hobbies. People collect stamps, they collect coins, they collect old cars, they play bridge, they play poker, they're in bowling leagues, all kinds of hobbies. The average hobby is 200 to 500 hours a year people spend on it, and $200 to $500 a year in terms of money, because hobbies cost money. So how many people you think in this country have decided they are going to have a Pentagon audit watchdog hobby? There's your answer. How many would it take to get the Pentagon to audit its budget? Here's my guess. Since about 98% of the people in this country think it's a pretty good idea if you're going to spend $650 billion to audit, you got public opinion on your side. I don't know anybody in the Congress, even in the pockets of Lockheed Martin, who dares to say publicly that the Pentagon should not be audited. So you have huge support on paper. If people in congressional districts, it's easy with the internet, they start a letterhead, and they say, citizens' hobby to audit the Pentagon, something like that. And they get 20 people in the congressional district. No big deal. It's 700,000 men, women, and children. After all, that money that's wasted could refurbish your local school. It could rebuild your local library. It could improve your public transit. It could create good jobs that can't be exported. So it isn't something, you know, out there. It's how we spend the tax dollars. 20 people in each congressional district, linked by internet, can then develop a strategy on each senator and representative. I've suggested that they create something called the citizen summons to senators and representatives, where the citizens summon your senator and your representative to a town meeting where you establish the agenda, you have your own experts, and the senator and representative is sitting there, and you're up here. Citizens are here. The member of Congress is duly instructed to do homework before the date of the town meeting. You provide them with materials if they can't get them themselves from the Congressional Research Service. And you basically go through the whole drill, and you say, do you disagree or do you agree? And they're not going to disagree. Are you going to introduce or co-sign a bill? When do you think we can have the first hearings before the Senate Armed Services, House Armed Services, and other relevant subcommittees? And if you can't tell us now, we will summon you to a meeting within 2 weeks so you can tell us. And if they balk, read them the preamble to the Constitution. It says, we the people. It does not say we the corporations, and it does not say we the Congress. The people are sovereign. Now, can anybody stop anybody from doing that? Is that really, as they say, rocket science? It happens to be a lot of fun. It happens to give people who have time on their hands meaning for their life. It happens to allow the older generation to teach the younger generation that's having a hard time looking away from its screens that there's something other to do in life when you're not working than text messaging, silly gossip, and foolish questions. Where are you? You turned the corner. Okay? Now, this is just one example. The fields of justice are full of opportunities. Full of opportunities. Let's take one that I'm sure we've all experienced. Motorcyclists roaring past us without helmets. Fortunately, in Maryland, I think you have to have helmets. 23 states require helmets. The rest do not. The federal government once said you're not going to get highway aid if you don't pass a helmet law. And then Senator Cranston from helmet-free California repealed it, got it repealed. And so all these states started responding to the, I wouldn't even say the majority of motorcycles, just a very tough minority of motorcycles surrounding the state capitol. Now, there are over 5,000 deaths a year from motorcycles, crashes. And the evidence is crystal clear. In the states where helmets are required, the death toll is much lower than where the helmets are not required. Not to mention the hospitals, the family anguish, the neurosurgeons, the cost, the pain, and all that goes with it. Now, what would it take for someone, a few people in each congressional district, and I'm sure you could get some good neurosurgeons behind you on that. I've talked to them, and they're just totally appalled when they have to deal with the brains spilling out in the emergency room, and could have been prevented by helmets. So you have good expert witnesses, expert testimony, to basically organize to get that job done. Now, I could go through the one area after another where there is a tremendous left-right support on the ground where people live, work, and raise their family. We are told again and again this is a polarized society. Well, because, number one, the two parties thrive on polarization. That's how they distinguish each other. That's how they raise their money. Pro-life, pro-choice, pro-school prayer, against school prayer, and so on. The media, of course, loves polarization because it's conflict, it's static, and it's always there because it's heavily ideological. So they don't have to keep learning new things. It's easy on their mental capacity. You can ask the same questions decade after decade. All right. Now look at the areas where there is left-right support. And again, when you look at it, it's important to say, where do you look at it? If you look at it in the think tanks here, if you look at it in Congress over there, state legislatures, they reflect a polarization. They're conservative, they're liberal, they're red state, they're blue state. That's just the way the country's campaign cash and other apparatus to divide and rule us, which goes back thousands of years, right? I mean, the few who rule the many, their chief tactic is divide and rule. But if you go down to where people live, work, raise their family, do you think a conservative says, I don't want my children to breathe clean air and drink clean water and eat safe food and make sure when they have medicines that they've been tested and approved? Of course not. Whether they're conservative, liberal, anarchistic, libertarian, progressive, whatever label they put, they all get ripped off. They all bleed. They all are disrespected. They're all excluded by these particular types of abuses. When Wells Fargo admitted this week that thousands of their employees somehow, to meet quotas, enlisted people with credit cards they didn't even know they were being provided these credit cards, and opened accounts which the people never knew about, and then proceeded to charge them. And the Wells Fargo brass fires 5,500 employees because of this, and then says, but we have 250,000 employees. Let's keep it in perspective. Do you think that they discriminated between ideological customers? Anybody they could rip off, they ripped off. It's called indiscriminate injustice. Most of the headlines about injustice is in discriminatory injustice. Police violence against African Americans, people excluded because of their skin in terms of voter suppression, and so on. But it's when we get into the much bigger area of indiscriminate injustice that we get left-right support. Now, let's just give you a few quick examples of left-right support. And I've written a book on it a couple years ago called Unstoppable: The Emerging Left-Right Alliance to Dismantle the Corporate State. By the way, I understand Unitarians read. And there is a report in the science section of the New York Times about 3 weeks ago that says, read books, live longer. Scientific study. Readers think, thinkers read. Now look at the left-right support just in terms of public opinion. Before we ask how much of it has gone operational, how many times have conservatives, liberals locked arms and moved to change things? Let's just use the public opinion. Civil liberties, left-right critique of the Patriot Act, getting into your medical files, your library files, being able to search your home and not tell you for 72 hours, and on and on. Big left-right opposition to that, as well as other civil liberty issues. Criminal justice reform. Why do you think 15 states have already passed laws reducing some of these outrageous jail terms for juveniles who are caught with a little drug here and there, street drug? That occurred because conservative and liberal legislators made it happen. And once liberal and conservative get together, it's an unbeatable political force. Crony capitalism, or what we call corporate welfare. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year for bailouts, handouts, giveaways, subsidies, tax escapes in a whole bewildering number of areas. In fact, half of what the federal government does touches on what they give away to corporations. Inflated contracts. Did you know, for example, we're the only country in the world that essentially gives away its hard rock minerals on public lands? Gold, silver, molybdenum. Any company in the world, foreign or domestic, under the 1872 Mining Act, which has never been changed, can come on our public land, discover hard rock minerals like the Canadian gold company Barrick did a number of years ago in Nevada. And it discovered $10 billion worth of gold. And it took its geologists, Department of Interior, held up the 1872 Mining Act. The government had to give them patents to 1,050 acres. And they got $10 billion worth of gold with no royalties back to Uncle Sam for $5,500. Not bad. No other country in the world, developed or undeveloped, comes close to that kind of giveaway of our natural resources. There are 180-foot spruce trees in Alaska in the Tongass Forest when I last looked at it a number of years ago. These taxpayer built the roads. The private timber companies used our roads. They would cut down 180-foot Spruce Street, you can imagine how old it was, for the price of an Alaskan cheeseburger. Huge left-right support to stop this crony capitalism, from libertarian to progressive. Breaking up the big New York banks that are too big to fail, screaming in over 90%. Prosecuting Wall Street crooks at that same level, 90%. Cracking down on corporate crime with more resources, prosecutors, investigators. How many people you think are against that back on a corner of Main and Elm, USA? Very, very few. The corporate crime reporter editor told me once that he could put it out every day, not just every week here in Washington. There is such a corporate crime wave. And you see it, financial crimes, you see it violating pollution laws, violating worker safety laws, consumer laws, environmental laws. The laws are not really very well enforced, even though they are pretty modest, having been shaved in the legislative process to reduce penalties and so on. Even with that, they're not very well enforced. Let's take a more difficult one, empire. You know, until the media and the television got together with the retired military brass at their side before the invasion of Iraq, majority of the people were against it. Even though both parties either were for it or indifferent, they weren't exactly two views being promoted through the media, Democrat, Republican. Democrats are a bit muted. And the same is true for a lot of adventures overseas. People have some sense that it's not working out. You start out with a criminal gang in northeast Afghanistan, and suddenly, 10, 12 years later, look what you have. 20 countries, and Al-Qaeda offshoots, and ISIS, and this and that. Chaos, violence, destruction. Millions of refugees. Really successful military policy, huh? When you make foreign policy into brute military force policy. This is a policy that knows no flunking grade. You tell these promoters of our military and foreign policy, well, look, the reality is it's failing. It's failing. You're killing civilians. You're disrupting life. You're committing sociocide. You're hitting them with drones. You're hitting them with all kinds of anti-personnel weapons. Children are being blown up. They can't go to school anymore. The streets are terror. And it's just getting more hatred and more recruits. And when do you flunk? There's no flunking grade. That's why there's a left-right arousal against this. How about clean elections? If you put a number of electoral reforms in front of people back home, they're not going to ideologically split the way they do here in Washington. People know that money corrupts politics. People know it nullifies their votes. People know that it's all kinds of complexities about qualifying to vote, where, registering, how, precinct address, etc. People know that they don't have much choice on the ballot. It's one step ahead of the Kremlin. You got the Republican and the Democrat. It's the hardest country in the Western world to get on the ballot if you're a third-party candidate, to give people more voices and choices. Why is that? Because third parties are the producers of the new ideas for justice, and they upset the status quo. It was the Liberty Party in 1840 that launched the drive against slavery. It wasn't the Whig Party, the Democratic Party, where third parties launched the effort for women's right to vote, for the farmer and labor reforms in the late 19th century, and right up through Medicare, Social Security, unemployment compensation, 40-hour week, progressive taxation. All of these were put forth first by third parties that never won a national election. So why would the two major parties want such burrs under their saddle? And so, worse than any country in the Western world and a lot in the non-Western world, It's more difficult to get on the ballot in many states than any other country. Have a multi-party system. Then you have trade. Now these are misnamed, these trade agreements. They're not just trade agreements. They're agreements relating to the subordination of domestic consumer, labor, and environmental standards to the supremacy of trade. It's not just reducing tariffs and quotas. A lot of people think it's a good thing. It's that when NAFTA and the WTO and TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, tell you that if you live in a state or in a country that has a higher protection level for consumers and workers and the environment, that those can be called by other countries that have lower protections non-tariff trade barriers. For example, we couldn't have gotten the airbag through under NAFTA and WTO. Why? Because we were first with the airbag. And other countries want to ship cars to the U.S., and they didn't have airbags. And had we had NAFTA or WTO, the World Trade Organization, they would have taken us to these tribunals, and they're secret, in Geneva, where part-time judges who are full-time corporate trade attorneys, will you believe this, decide that our country is engaging in a non-tariff barrier by having higher environmental, worker, and consumer standards. And therefore, we have to repeal it, or we pay billions of dollars in fines. Now, some of you here may say, why isn't that unconstitutional? Good question. Ask our Supreme Court. It's because we enter into these agreements and we can get out in 6 months. So the judges say, well, we can get out in 6 months, even though we have circumvented our courts, our legislature, and our executive branch through these tribunals in Geneva, which are secret. There are no transcripts. The only appeal is up through the hierarchy of the World Trade Organization. So how many of you have gone in a supermarket? Do you ever look and see where, if you eat meat, where the country of origin is? Do you ever do that? It's labeled, right? Well, no more, because a couple of countries, I think it was Brazil and Mexico, but don't hold me to it, took us to the tribunal in Geneva and said, that label's discriminatory against imports of meat from our countries, exports to the U.S. And the corporate trade lawyers, AKA temporary judges, agreed and said we either had to repeal the requirement that Congress passed to label country of origin, so it came from Canada, Japan, South Korea, Mexico, U.S., or pay up to $1 billion in fines. Now you know why there's a left-right support, because they sense it's a loss of sovereignty, it's a loss of self-control. What do we have 3 branches of government for? And it's a loss of jobs, hollowing out whole communities in this country after we're told that trade is a win-win proposition. But the remaining facts never seem to bore it out. We were told, for example, that the South Korea trade agreement was going to increase U.S. jobs. It's lost almost 30,000 jobs and billions of dollars of trade deficit. It doesn't matter what the evidence is. You think Trump's the only guy who disregards evidence? Welcome to Washington, D.C. Where do you think he learned it from? Watching the programs on Sunday. There is just a few quickies. Big left-right support for direct democracy, initiative, referendum, recall. Half the states have it. Half the states, mostly east of the Mississippi, do not have it. Investor power. The biggest wealth in the country is owned by we the people. So let's start with shareholders, mutual funds, and pension funds. They own the majority of stock of the companies in the New York Stock Exchange, General Electric, Ford, whatever. And they don't have any power. They're like puppets. They don't control their hired hands in the executive suite. And they're told, if you don't like the way the company's being run by the bosses, sell your stock. And if the shareholders or mutual funds say, or pension fund, no, we don't want to sell. We want to throw the rascals out that are running the company into the ground, enriching themselves. Huge left-right support for investor power in that regard. Even in the area of minimum wage, comes in at 75% or more. That's a lot of conservative workers in Walmart who don't want to fall on their axe saying, I don't want $10 an hour because I'm a conservative. I'm trying to make it on $8. Then we have full Medicare for all. Everybody in, nobody out. Free choice of doctor and hospital. Guess what? They have it in Canada. And what do they do in Canada? They have everybody covered from cradle to grave on half the amount of per capita expenditure that we have in this country. Tens of millions of people not covered or undercovered, and we're spending $9,400 average per capita, and they're spending about $4,500 average. Are they smarter than we are? For heaven's sake, they look like us. Why did they do it? Because they got together their 1%. They got together enough people, led by a former premier of Saskatchewan. They did it in Saskatchewan. The doctors went on strike. Mortality levels declined, by the way. Nobody can quite figure that one out. The former Prime Minister, Tommy Douglas, he's now repeatedly viewed as the greatest Canadian in Canadian history. Once Saskatchewan got it, then it went through the other provinces. In the meantime, we were mired in the Vietnam War. You see some of the consequences of getting into these wars, the collateral consequences? And Lyndon Johnson decided that he couldn't get full Medicare in 1964, so he settled for Medicare for the elderly and Medicaid under certain criteria. And now we're stuck with it. Over 40,000 people in this country die every year because they cannot afford health insurance to get diagnosed and treated in time. You can imagine how many are continuing to be ill or injured. Nobody in Luxembourg, Austria, Taiwan, Japan, Sweden, Germany, the UK, France, Denmark, nobody dies because they can't get health insurance. Left-right support, again and again and again. I have 24 of them in this book. These are not small matters. They're extremely fundamental to the good society. Extremely realistic. When Bernie Sanders was talking about full Medicare for all, he was criticized by the Republicans and Hillary Clinton as being pie in the sky. You're going to blow the budget apart. And all you have to do is just look at the other countries. All of them cover everybody for less than half of what we do. And they have better outcomes, because if everyone's covered, they're not going to die because they don't have health insurance. And so it continues, one area after another. Now, when I have imposed on myself, from time to time, a duty to talk to young people, talk with young people. And in the old days, the big thing when you had a high school auditorium was discipline. You know, they'd be making snide remarks or talking to their buddies, and the principal would have to come up, please respect the speaker. Shh. Now there's no problem. It's all shh, like this. So you have to engage in question technique. And you know, this young generation thinks because they have access to the world's information flow that they can sort of lord it over us. What they don't understand is precisely because they can get any information they want by pushing buttons, they don't incorporate it in their memory. So a little while back, I'm talking to a high school of some prestige in Connecticut, and we went to lunch with 7, 8 students who selected themselves because they were more interested and they were more up on what was going on. And I said to them in the middle of the conversation, do you know the 2 senators' names in Connecticut? No. How about the name of the governor? No. Supreme Court justices? No. You're a member of Congress? House? No. Why? Because they can get it anytime they want. But if it isn't in their mind, they have nothing to build on. They have nothing to add, to think about, because it's just instantly retrievable. And so they go to college fact-deprived like you can't believe. I gave a speech last year at the Harvard Law School, my alma mater, and I said to them, you know, you are not factually prepared to go to law school. You may have done very good on your LSAT and gotten good grades, but you're not factually prepared. You don't know anything about what corporations are doing in this country and in the world until you get cheated by a credit card operator or something like that. So I asked him 3 questions. The first one is, who are you? So, like, what kind of question is that? So I said, well, who's the intrepid student who will play this little game with me? So usually 1 or 2 raise their hand. I say, okay, let's go. Who are you? And they give the name, Jane Doe. Okay, who else are you? And they say, I'm a student at so-and-so high school. Yeah? Who else are you? I'm a tennis player. Okay, keep going. Who else are you? Well, there's a big pause. And then you give them a little hint. You say, look, you do a lot of things. Don't you have hobbies? Don't you have relatives? Aren't you a niece? You know, a daughter, a son? You know, so then it all comes out. And they say, I'm a collector of this. I love to hike, and I'm a swimmer, and so on. And you get about 30 answers. And you say, you know, you're not really telling me about a very important role that you have and everyone in this room has. And sooner or later, someone raises the question and said, I'm a citizen. So they looked at themselves in all kinds of roles, but not as a citizen. And then sort of explain why it's important to be civically active, why everything they liked about what they inherited in this country started with a few people being civically active. They defined themselves as citizens. The second question I ask them is, what do you own? Okay, so all hands go up, you know. They own a motorcycle, or they own a car, or they own clothes, or they own all kinds of music. And they have a huge variety. And sometimes they'll even become a little abstract. They'll say, I own a savings account. They'll say something like that. So I said, keep going, keep going. And it's all personal ownership. I said, well, do you know that you're part owner in the biggest wealth in the country? You and your parents are part owners of the public lands. 1/3 of America, plus offshore. All kinds of minerals and resources. You and your parents are part owner of the public airwaves. We're the landlords. The radio and TV stations are the tenants. Woo! What tenants? They decide who says what 24 hours a day and pay us no rent. Compliments of Congress and the FCC and the lobbyists on their back. I said, tell me the names of some of the great new industries. They say, the computer industry and the internet and biotech and nanotech, they know them all. You know, the only one they didn't know was containerization industry, modern pharmaceutical industry, aerospace industry. I said, you know, your parents' tax dollars and grandparents' tax dollars coming out of the Pentagon and NASA and the National Institutes of Health, they provided the R&D for this. They gave it away. Anti-cancer drugs. The aerospace industry right out of the Air Force. Containerization out of the Navy. All kinds of free R&D, trillions of dollars. And they take credit for it. And so these children never grow up to understand what the commons is all about. The commons, like the nearby park, or the river, the stream, the air, the public airways, the intellectual property. They don't have any factual grasp of that. And of course, if we own the commons, and we grow up learning about it, we might just ask the question, if we own it, why do the companies control it? Why do they get our natural resources free, or for bargain basement prices? Why do they use the airways free? Why is there no quid pro quo for the trillions of dollars to Microsoft, Cisco, Google, Intel, who without tax R&D going back 40, 50 years, you would never heard of them? Well, the third question deals with growing up corporate. Now, I've never met anybody who hasn't grown up corporate, because I've never met a visiting Martian. From kindergarten on, we look at the world through the ads, through the textbooks, just the way the corporations want us to look at the world. They even pipe in now a few minutes every morning with a lot of ads and so-called news. So I say, I'm going to say the following words, and these words are going to provoke images in your mind. So here we go. Violence, crime, welfare, regulation. Okay, now I'm sure I say to them, you're thinking of street crime, maybe wars, in terms of violence. You're thinking of burglaries and things like that in terms of crimes. You're thinking of government regulation, red tape, and you're thinking of poor people lining up to get their welfare checks or food stamps, right? Yeah, yeah. I said, you're not wrong. But quantitatively, in sheer dollars, in sheer control, there is far more corporate regulation, corporate welfare on the backs of the taxpayers, corporate crime and violence. It's not even close. But you see, every culture that is run by a small minority of people, and most cultures, the anthropologists tell us, define impermissible violence as that violence that the others commit. And the permissible violence, or the ignored violence, is the violence that comes from the activities of the few. So we have 14,000 street homicides, and we're told about it on the evening news ad infinitum. We would like to think that's preventable. Watch this. According to OSHA, 60,000 people, as I mentioned, workplace-related diseases and trauma every year, 60,000. Over 250,000 people, according to the Johns Hopkins study, die every year in this country from hospital malpractice, hospital errors, hospital-induced infections, and misprescription of drugs. That's 700 a day. This is from the medical school. It's not from the law school. Came out in March, and they said it was a conservative figure. 700 a day. Silent violence. 60,000 die, according to EPA, from air pollution every year. Silent violence. And so it goes. But when we hear the word violence, it's over street crime violence here or abroad. And the same is true, of course, for corporate regulation. I said, what do you mean corporate regulation? Well, what do you think they do on Capitol Hill every day? They turn the government against the people. And the tax laws, for example, they favor the tax law. They turn the government against the people in a whole host of ways where the people are regulated but not the corporations. But even more than that is that they have developed a system of attacking, with some success, the two great liberation movements of self-actuated justice that we inherited from medieval England. The law of torts, which is the law of wrongful injury, and the law of contracts. In medieval England, the transition from being a serf to a free person was a transition from the status of the serf to contract. You entered into agreement, presumably didn't like it, you weren't like a serf, they whipped you, you could walk away. We inherited that. The law of wrongful injury, when someone in medieval England injured somebody, beat them up or whatever, the victims and the next of kin had two choices. They accepted it and didn't do anything, or they initiated revenge. So along came more sensible people in England and said, no, we're going to have laws of wrongful injury, assault, battery, and a court of law with a jury of your peers. That was brought over and elaborated. But you see, that's self-actuated. You don't have to ask people's permission for that. And the corporations didn't like that. So they started ensnaring you in fine print contracts that no one can understand, and that having the fine print prevented you from going to court, having a trial by jury, it's called compulsory arbitration, and doing things that vitiate the very notion of a meeting of the minds voluntarily to enter into a binding agreement or contract. For example, unilateral modification is part of a lot of these contracts with the credit card companies, airline companies, hospitals, installment loan payments, mortgages, etc. Unilateral modification means that you have agreed in advance to any changes that the vendor inflicts on you. And so how many of you have noticed that in your frequent flyer program, Delta, for example, they can, well, it's 30,000? No, we'll take it to 40 to get a round trip, 50 to get a round trip. Because they say that in that fine print, you gave them the right to alter the contract unilaterally. Now, these are the two pillars of liberation. You don't have to ask permission. And they're taking it away from us. And nobody's teaching it in the schools or in the colleges. And they hardly go to that level of generality in the law schools. They're in the weeds of tort and contracts. And they only spend 2 hours in law school in the contracts course on fine print contracts. And yet 99% of the contracts we'll ever sign are contracts where we sign on a dotted line or click on the computer. We don't even see the contract. We try to get it and they keep it from us. They give us a little summary. That is why I say that our country is under the yoke of the corporate supremacists, and that we should never tolerate giving these corporations as a legal entity all the rights that we have as people, giving them the rights of personhood. And to turn this around is a piece of cake. It's a piece of cake. It's less than 1% of people organizing around a major agenda in every congressional district and being a watchdog of Congress hobbyist. They volunteer 200 to 500 hours a year, and they put $200 to $500 they raise or contribute to open up 2 full-time offices in every congressional district with 2 people in each office representing you while you're working and doing other things, with coordination around the country on 535 people. Piece of cake. You say, Nader, stop being pie in the sky. What are you talking about, piece of cake? There are people in this audience who regulated the auto industry. There never were more than 10 people. They had the majority of people behind them. They went up to Capitol Hill. They went to the media. At that time, the media was serious. They got 6 reporters to keep reporting on the bills and the lobbying and the struggles. Drew Pearson was one of them in the Washington Post. And they would have occasional people around the country helping out with a stubborn senator or representative. But it's a fraction of 1%. And we got these laws through the air pollution law, the water pollution law, the Free Information Act, the Product Safety Commission Act, the Flammable Fabrics Act, the establishment of OSHA, NHTSA, EPA, right? We got them in that 1966 to 1974. And what do you think happened? The corporations became very resilient. They said, we're losing. And so they beefed up their lobbying. They poured the money in. They went on TV with the ads. They got the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which we call the U.S. Chamber of Horrors, involved. And they began electing their people. They began replacing good senators who retired or defeating representatives. Where were we? Back home. We were coasting. We thought, well, you know, this is not a bad Congress. Look, they're doing this and this. And they read the headlines and they see the air getting cleaner. We were coasting. We weren't organizing to counterattack the counterattack of the corporations. And that's water over the dam. The trouble is, there's still water coming to go over the dam. And that's why we start with the simple proposition that the main instrument of our democratic society, the main instrument of our democratic society to change this country is what? It's the Congress. That's the main instrument. We recapture Congress, and it turns around the federal government. It gets the media. The media cannot ignore Congress, congressional hearings. We can have all the news conferences we want. You start with the Congress. You start with the civic summons to the members of Congress. You reassert the sovereignty of the people. In every congressional district, there are community colleges, there are colleges, there are social studies teachers, there are neighborhood leaders. There's all kinds of talent. But if it's not organized and focused, forget it. It doesn't have an impact. One lobbyist from tobacco company going to Congress has more power. Now, a fraction of the people turned around the battle against the tobacco industry. When we started, 45% of adults smoked. It's now 17%. When we started, students would go into classrooms and they could hardly see their students because everyone was smoking. People would go on airlines. Remember that, right? They would smoke. I once sat down next to a guy who lit a cigar up. I said, what are you doing? You know, if you burn toast in your kitchen, one little itty-bitty toast, it fills up. I got a right. Well, he didn't actually have a right to do the cigar. But they smoked in trains, in buses, in hospital waiting rooms. No more. Young people today, if they went on a train or airplane, they saw someone smoking, they'd be horrified. The anathema of today becomes the commonplace of tomorrow. So when they asked the leading staffer in the Congress, Mike Perchuk, who led the fight with Senator Magnuson on smoking, I asked him the other day, he's writing a book on Senate staff when they really did something. He's retired now in Santa Fe. I said, Mike, nobody can answer this question better than you can, even though you can't be totally precise. At the peak of the battle that threw the tobacco industry on the defensive, got it regulated, et cetera, lost lawsuits. How many people in this country were working full-time in the public health and in the citizen arena, medical schools, whatever? Said never more than a few thousand people, up against hundreds of thousands of people in the tobacco industry pushing the other way and putting money into Congress. See what happens when you have majority opinion on the side of the facts with a few people full-time. How did we ever get arms agreements with the Soviet Union? That was a no-no. Are you kidding? The communist peril. Never. Well, then people started marching in Washington and New York, 300,000 people. Ronald Reagan looked out from the White House and he saw some well-dressed Republicans marching. Of all people, he initiated further arms control. And now as we speak, Russians are here, inspectors, U.S. inspectors are over there, monitoring the dismantling of nuclear warheads until they get to the minimum of several thousand that they agreed to from 30, 40,000. What did it take? Now there's something funny, maybe you can help us out in the discussion. If someone starts a business and makes raging profits successfully, other people say, hey, that's for me, I'm going in. If someone learns how to throw a football better than others, their athletes say, I better learn that. That's success. Somehow, no matter how many examples you give in American history, going back 200 years, where a few people, backed by public sentiment, turned around the impossible, you still cannot get people excited enough to show up. And those of you who are here are obviously more than average active citizens. You've tried to get people out, right? You've tried to sign petitions. Can you go to the town meeting? Can you go to this rally? It's like pulling teeth, even though they agree with you. Is it television that did it? Is it a sense of powerlessness that we learn in our schools that did it? Is it the screen now? The internet that's doing it? Whatever it is, just remember, before we despair, all we need is 1% or less of the people in congressional districts or state legislative districts with majority opinion mounting on our side, left-right support, and we prevail. And the kind of society we live in will be one of great gratification, healthy, safe, productive, equitable. It's not pie-in-the-sky stuff. It's built into our Constitution. It's built into other legal documents. Let's make them come to life. And if we need one more motivation, just look at what kind of country and world we're handing to our descendants. And let's resurrect that word posterity, which our founding fathers used again and again until our culture forgot about it. Thank you. Thank you.
This is a crowd that likes to ask questions.
Yes.
So will you stay around for a few minutes?
Oh, by all means. Because, am I on?
Yes. There are microphones on
Yeah.
the outside aisles for anybody that wants to ask a question so you can be heard.
Yes, this is the best part of it. We have a book signing out there, and we have 4 days, 2 at Constitution Hall and 2 at the Carnegie Institution at the end of this month, called Breaking Through Power, and we're bringing together the greatest number of accomplished civic leaders on more redirections and reforms ever brought together in American history. And we have to fill the seats. And that is not easy. I was told yesterday Bill Maher filled Constitution Hall with his jokes, his off-color stories, 3,500 people, most of them presumably liberal, and we've got to fill Constitution Hall and these issues. And we can talk about them, but very, very, very briefly. The first day is teaching civic skills by subject matter of the leading experts who've actually done it in America. Pension reform, auto safety, Congress, energy. The second day deals with this issue of separation of ownership and control that I mentioned. You know, we own the commons, we don't control. Pension funds own the stock, don't control. And leading experts from around the country. The third day is how do you start citizen groups? What different models are there? Like the public interest research groups, like checkoffs in your utility bill, starting a nonprofit consumer group to participate in utility rate making. There are different modes. The time dollar issue. How many have ever heard of the time dollar? Well, the creator of that is going to be there, Edgar Kahn. That's where we create a new currency of exchanging hours of voluntary work. So an elderly couple has a teenager cut grass, and the teenager gets tutored by the elderly couple in the courses, but it's much more sophisticated than that. And the afternoon is free DC statehood. It's the only capital in the world where people don't have the voting right for members of Congress. And the last days, what I mentioned is torts and contracts, self-actuating liberation rights in our country under great peril. And once people realize that it's being taken away from them, watch out corporations. That's what it's about. So Todd Main is out there. He can explain it to you. He has leaflets like this, and you can have your family, your students, whatever. I'm trying to get the law schools out, for example. I say, look, if there's a big snowstorm in DC, you cancel classes, right? Okay, this is a big civic storm here. So let them out. When we went to school, we said, what do you remember is usually an extracurricular event, right? It wasn't something in the course. Okay, can we start? Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Nader, thank you so much. I think a lot of us are looking for inspiration at this time. Do you have a single actionable item or a focal point that people can walk away from tonight to direct their energy? Everyone's inspired, but I feel as if some of us need a single next step. Is there a website, for instance, or anything like that you would advocate for us?
We have the websites breakingthroughpower.org, breakingthroughpower.org, and the one carry away is to start a Congress watchdog group, and just start it with 10 people. Take it to 20, take it to 50. There are all kinds of aids and all kinds of ways you can do it, and how to get press, and how to get the member of Congress to respond, how to write a letter to a member of Congress that has 20 times the impact with the same letter with the same content, but it's written in a different way and a different PS. So start a little letterhead, desktop publishing, easy, and announce yourself to your senators and representatives. Just announce yourself. And you start playing with them. He says, how many people would you like turn out so that you will come to our town meeting? Just give us an idea. 50, 100, 200, 500? No problem. A senator will come out for 60 people now. And nobody shows up. We had 2 senators come up in New England, and they called up the staff and they said, look, you know, the senator's busy and respects the citizens, but are at least 30 people going to show up? That was a de minimis, 30 people. Start with the letterhead, read up about Congress, what others have done successfully in past years, and it starts a club. It's a Congress Watchdog Club. And then you start with the agenda. You'll see how fast it spreads. You know, when you have mass rallies on a weekend in Washington, D.C., the members of Congress aren't there. And the press isn't there for the most part. They'll give you a photograph. And so at the end, there's just debris, and it's sort of the energy goes into the ether. But when you laser beam it, when you engage in personam lobbying, like a Congress Watchdog Club, it's completely different impact. The most powerful lobbies in our country do not have rallies and marches. Have you ever seen a rally by the military-industrial complex led by the Lockheed Martin band? You think AIPAC has rallies and marches? You think the NRA has rallies and marches? Because they are in personam lobbying on 530 people, their staff, who they know back home, their doctors, their lawyers, their accountants, their beer-drinking buddies, their golf partners, in personam lobbying. That's how you can turn it around. And you outnumber all of them. These agendas massively outnumber the most successful single-issue lobbying.
Hi, thank you. You know, I know Colorado has a measure on the ballot this November for state-funded health care for the state.
Yeah.
And if that were to pass and the legislature there doesn't kill it, how likely do you think it is that that could be a mini Saskatchewan and start a wider spread movement in that direction? Or is there just too much opposition to that?
No, we were all looking for one state to break through. We thought Vermont was going to, on single-payer, full Medicare. It all depends how full the Medicare is, whether it replaces the insurance companies. And of course, it will be attacked on federal preemption issues. You know, they'll say it's interstate commerce and you can't do that. But the momentum from one state doing it would be very, very consequential. It would mobilize a lot of people in at least a dozen other states to do it. And it's the way things get started in this country very often is at the state level. If you want to go to singlepayeraction.org, go to singlepayeraction.org, and you'll get a lot of material on what's going on and help spread the word there.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi there, Mr. Nader. Thanks for being here tonight. My question kind of dovetails with the previous questioner. You've spoken a lot tonight about taking action at the federal level and trying to encourage the national Congress. But what is your view rather on taking action at the state level, which maybe for some people is a little less daunting, and then hoping that that percolates up?
Same thing. It's the same practice. You form in the state legislative districts, you form state legislative watchdog clubs. And by the way, in order to reduce the infighting and the bickering, you start it with an agenda. And you say, look, you want to join us, we'll have to agree with this agenda. There's five redirections, you know, living wage or full Medicare for all and so forth. You choose, but you try to minimize subsequent conflict by having initial agreement of joining the Watchdog Club. At the local level, it should be even easier. One time I was at some mobilizing seminar and a young man stood up and said, I'm from Weehawken, New Jersey, 14,000 people. And it's a terrible state. The town is in terrible situation, disrepair, etc. So I decided to go to the town meeting. So he goes to the town meeting, he's the only one there. So he thought there must be some aberration. So 2 weeks later, he goes to the town meeting, he's still the only one there. So I said to him, okay, let's operate on the 1% principle. I said, let's say there are 10,000 adults in Weehawken, the rest are under 18. What if you had 100 people like you with the same vision, the same attention to detail, and willingness to spend time? What do you think would happen? I thought he was going to fall off his chair. It's 100 people, we changed the whole town. He said, because we got the other people with us, the silent majority, so to speak, with us. It's the same principle. You see, it's laser beam, in personam, lobbying on the branch of government that's got the taxing power, the appropriation power, the investigating power. You see, you start with the smallest branch of government that has the most power under our state constitutions. That's the legislature.
Thank you.
Mr. Nader, I am wondering what you think of something that's been in the news a lot recently, which is the rising price of pharmaceuticals, particularly the EpiPen is the latest thing to have been in the news. And where would you see citizen action going on something like that?
Yeah, by the way, most of these drugs are developed with U.S. taxpayer support. Tax credits, tax research at NIH, National Institutes of Health. And the companies, U.S. companies operating around the world, they charge Americans the highest price. They can't get away with it in Canada, Switzerland, Germany, because it's price control. Not that strong in Canada, but we pay the highest pharmaceutical prices. Number one, anything that is developed with taxpayer money should be under reasonable price provisions. Period. That's one. That's a lot of drugs, by the way, and medical devices. Number two, if you get a monopoly situation, de facto, like the Mylan Corporation, right, which, by the way, quit America and became a Dutch corporation to escape taxes. These companies have no sense of patriotism. You want to scare big business, accuse them of being unpatriotic in the land of their birth. They're not ready for that. And you can document it ABC. If it has a de facto, it can be considered an essential service and subjected to price control. And the third is you get rid of the restriction on Uncle Sam bargaining for volume discounts, which occurred in 2004 when Congress passed the drug benefit law that boomed the taxpayer support of drug purchases. They prevented Uncle Sam from doing what the VA does and what the Pentagon does, and that's volume discount negotiating. So those three, that'll take care of it. Another way of taking care of it is for pension funds that are usually workers, start exerting their muscle because they own about 20% of the New York Stock Exchange companies. That's a lot of power. They got to wake up and say, okay, we're owners, let's start creating the muscle of ownership on these out-of-control executives, who, by the way, linked the price increase in the injector to their pay. So that they went up, they had an incentive to gouge you because they made millions of dollars in terms of the yardstick. No, they're completely out of control. And the beauty we own, by far, the greatest property, the greatest capital, but we don't control it. I mean, trillions of dollars of pension funds, trillions of dollars of mutual funds, trillions of dollars of regular savings. Who owns that? We own it. But they control it. You see how smart the corporate attorneys are? When they realized 100 years ago they couldn't own everything, they said, all right, let the people control it. We'll own it. I mean, let the people own it. We'll control it. If you go to the Health Research Group of Public Citizen, you'll get good information on that. Go to citizen.org.
Thank you.
They have a newsletter and all things like that. Citizen.org. Yes, sir.
Thank you again for your incredible legacy of contribution. I really have a question about how we organize across the ideological divide.
Sure.
Most of us here in this room are not kind of like right in the center trying to figure out what we believe in. We're on one side or another. And we tend to hang around with people who share the same ideological feelings and opinions with each other. And so what you're advocating is that we need to organize with people that we don't normally communicate with. And I'm just trying to understand how you would help us create a blueprint for doing that.
That's a very important question. I tried to deal with it in the book because, you're entitled to say, okay, this big left-right support, why isn't it happening? Why isn't it going more operational? Not just, it's already going in criminal justice and minimum wage. And I'll tell you why. It's just what the speaker just said. Both sides do not spend much time with each other, even socially, never mind civically. Both sides have been victimized by this divide and rule, and they tend to focus on high emotional areas which I mentioned, where there really are divisions between left-right. That's where the money is. That's where the foundations is. That's where the Koch brothers' money comes from. And both sides can't get over the yuck factor. Here's the yuck factor. Like you got right-wingers in Washington that are against corporate welfare. They call it crony capitalism. And we're against corporate welfare. And I try to get some of the citizen groups to meet with people that they totally despise on the other issues, like reproductive rights. I'm going to sit down with this guy. He's against abortion. Look what he's done. But he's on your side in terms of corporate welfare. And that is, the yuck factor is very much reinforced by the fact that these citizen groups, left, right, are funded mostly on issues where there are real divisions. And so my recommendation is that new groups get formed where there's no distraction on divisive issues. They are formed only focusing on left-right alliance issues. When they go to school, they go in the morning. Like, I'll give you a quick example. Cato Institute, Heritage Foundation, Public Citizen, and Economic Policy Institute have all come out with reports over the years against corporate welfare, against tax-funded stadiums, all the rackets. But they're not working together because every day they go to work on issues that they disagree with, but that's where the funding comes from. That's where the staff is skilled on those issues. So, say corporate tax policy, split. You're not going to get Economic Policy Institute agreeing with the Heritage Foundation on that. So you need groups, new groups that just focus on left-right alliance issues. It's a pretty hard mindset to overcome. But once you do, it's an unbeatable political movement. You see a senator having an appointment with citizens from back home, and they come in and they say, I'm a conservative, I'm a liberal, but we're together on this. The senator freaks out. Doesn't know how to game the system. They know how to game one or the other. They don't know how to game both, you see. And by the way, we've done this in the past. We got the free information law through, left-right, 1974. We stopped the Clinch River breeder reactor. We had Public Citizen, our group, and the Center for Competitive Enterprise. And we beat them in the Senate. They were totally stunned. We beat Howard Baker. We beat the president. We beat the General Electric and the nuclear lobby by about 6-7 votes in the Senate and stopped it. It was a boondoggle project in Tennessee that was way over, wasn't workable, and it was spending money like wildfire. So the False Claims Act of 1986, left-right, against defrauding the government, whistleblower protection. Yeah, yes, sir.
I'm going to just see if we can limit it to 2 more questionnaires. And I'm sorry, folks, but we also wanted to go in the back room. We have a cake honoring the 50th anniversary of Unsafe at Any Speed. And it would also be and we'll have coffee and cake, but it'll give you an opportunity to start to group up on some of the issues that you'd like to get more deeply involved in.
So I'll shorten my answers. We'll get a few more questions in. By the way, People often say, how'd you turn out this way, Ralph? I say, I had a lucky choice of parents. And this is the book. It's a bestseller. 17 Traditions, How Our Parents Raised 4 Children in an Industrial Town in Connecticut. And I've had people say, this is worth 20 books by developmental child psychologists. Yes.
Could I? Oh.
Yes.
Mr. Nader, I thank you for your remarks. I was at a hearing of the Public Services Commission in Rockville on PEPCO's proposed rate increase. PEPCO, as you know, is merging with Exelon, this big company, and they want to increase the rates, which might add $13 or so to everybody's monthly bill on the average. And I went to this hearing, and there were just a handful of people who testified. Now, most of the people who testified were against the rate increase, which I thought was very good. Two days later, there was a similar hearing, which I did not attend, in Largo, and I understand again that people showed up and testified. But people can still send their written comments to the Public Services Commission, and I just think this is at the state level rather than the federal level. But I think that would be another one of these types of issues that could bring right and left together in terms of opposing some of the rate increases.
Excellent, yeah. And in Illinois, we got a bill through years ago requiring the utilities to put an insert in their bill inviting people to join a citizen utility group with economists and others. Make a long story short, they negotiated with Commonwealth Edison for a $1.3 billion refund for being overcharged without even having to go to court, because they had their own experts, they had the ability to get press, because they're staff of 10 people, because enough people filled out the card and sent in $5. So that's another way of, if we're going to give these utilities monopolies, what do we get in return? We should get reciprocity. Yes.
So one of my concerns is how narrow our political system is, the two ruling parties compared to other first world countries. I think we forget, it's the young, I was watching the Young Turks online the other night, and they were talking about how Hillary Clinton is actually to the right of Canada's Conservative Party. And with the Democratic Party moving over my lifetime farther to the right, I think, where is Donald Trump and the Republicans to go? They can only go over the cliff. So I've been working since 2001 here in Maryland to try to get instant runoff or ranked choice voting at the state level. And that's a little bit of a time, not as long as you've been working, but 2001's quite a while. And the Democratic Party at the state level keeps blocking even this smallest reform that would end lesser evil voting that's part of our electoral system. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about, how to open our political system beyond two-party rule and control and open it to third parties, and how to address the difficulty of getting ruling party legislators of both parties to vote against their own party's interests and support the voters' interests.
You know how the two parties like to call third parties spoilers, and which is a politically bigoted word because it's only applied to small parties. Like, you don't see the Republican or Democrat Party calling each other spoilers. They own the voters. Right? We're not supposed to disturb them. And a way to get rid of the spoiler argument is instant runoff voting, where when you vote, you first choice, second choice, third choice. And until someone gets a majority, your second choice kicks in or your third choice kicks in. So they can't use the word spoiler. I know this is not a good explanation, but one of the reasons why instant runoff voting has never gotten passed is you could never explain it in 8 seconds on a TV interview. But San Francisco has it. There are cities that have it already. Western countries have it. Why are the Democrats and Republicans opposed to it? Because it will get more people voting third party, and if the third party doesn't get a majority, their second choice triggers. I mean, just for example, let's say you want to vote for the Green Party in Maryland, but you don't want Trump to win. and your least worst choice is Hillary. So when you go vote, let's say you vote for Jill Stein, second choice, Hillary Clinton. So if Jill Stein doesn't get a majority, your vote clicks down to Hillary Clinton. And it keeps going until one person gets a majority. And they don't want that, because that will get a lot of people saying, oh, you know, I'm going to have my cake and eat it too. I'm going to vote my conscience for the best person, third party, and if it doesn't work out, the least worst of the two majors get my vote. So they don't want that, because that'll swell the ranks of the third party, even though at the end of the day, the votes get sucked out to the second or third choice, because unless the third party has a majority. I believe it should be like Australia. It's very simple. It's called universal voting. Australia, voting is a duty at the federal level. 96% vote. If you won't vote, you give an excuse, you know, you're sick or whatever. And if you don't have an excuse, they'll fine you 25 or 50 bucks. It goes into the electoral bank. And no one in Australia has to sweat out and put ads begging people to vote. Now, we have a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. There's only one duty, jury duty, which people like to get out of. Only one duty. How can you have rights without duties? And so there are 6, 7 countries, Austria is one, where voting is a duty. I remember once I was in Sydney, Australia, and I had a long cab drive, so I was making small talk. I figured I'd needle them. So I said, driver, how's it feel to live in a country where they make you vote? And he turned around and gave me this disgusted look, and he said, why, mate, it's just a civic duty. See the difference? Now, some civil libertarians have trouble with it. Here's how you deal with it. They can vote for people who are on the ballot, whose names are on the ballot. They can write in a vote, including themselves if they want. And they can vote for, this is my favorite, binding none of the above. That is a no confidence vote, which if it wins, cancels that election for mayor or governor and gets new elections in 30 days with new candidates. That way people will feel that they can, and that's exceptionally important in districts where there's only one dominant incumbent and the other party doesn't even have a credible opponent. In Massachusetts and Kentucky and Texas, about 60% of the state legislators have no opponent from the major party. That is, in Massachusetts, they have no Republican opponent. In Texas, they have no Democrat. You can imagine the havoc that none of the above will pay. Right? I mean, you say, cut this out. We want choices. Don't give us a one-party state based on gerrymandering and computerized politicians picking the voter. Can you imagine? The politicians now pick the voter. Yes.
So I'm interested in what you think of the privilege of limited liability and the idea of perpetual corporations, permanent corporations, and is there a left-right consensus on these issues?
It takes discussion, because we don't grow up talking about it or studying it, but if they do discuss it, I think there's a left-right opposition to treating a corporation as a person with equal rights as human beings and all kinds of privileges and immunities that we can never have, that they have.
Well, I was asking specifically about the fact that individuals invest in corporations have no liability for the behavior of
I was just getting to that. In the early 19th century, there was a time limit for corporate charter, and they had to renew it before the legislature and prove that they were on good behavior. That, of course, was eliminated about in the middle of the 19th century by the corporate lobbyists. The other point would be really decisive. It would have all kinds of consequences people haven't figured out. And that is, if General Electric has to pay $10 billion to clean up the Hudson River from PCBs, some of that is charged to the shareholders. So the shareholders are now immune. The only risk you have as a shareholder is the dollar value of your stock. And if you lose the whole stock, you lose it. But what he's suggesting, and what others have suggested, is no, that you make the shareholder have a moral partnership with the company and bear some of the cost, whether it's a criminal penalty or any other cost. Now that one, you can imagine the unpredicted consequences of that one. However, it really gets the mutual funds and pension funds thinking, because they're not assuming their fiduciary responsibility, to use a legal term. They are shareholders, and they don't like a company, they'll leave, or they'll vote for management blanket without even thinking, the compensation package, the boards of directors. They don't do their homework, and they don't represent differentiating policies from management. So they either rubber stamp management with few exceptions, or they leave, they sell the stock. Neither one is as powerful an instrument of accountability as if they were also on the hook. They're also on the hook, like BP and the Gulf of Mexico, $50 billion. The shareholders, they actually didn't. The share went down a little bit, then it went up. Some of them sold, some of them stayed in, still got the dividend. If they were hit with part of that $50 billion, they would have an incentive to find out how they can get better management, to throw out the management, to get more disclosure, to get more information ahead of time about what BP safeguards in the Gulf are. You see, it would change the whole dynamic. But I think we're going to get rid of corporate personhood before we get the liability one. And by the way,
Are you going to get to sign those books?
yes, we're going to sign the books. This is the other book that's out there. It's called The Good Fight, and it has a wonderful rendition from Mahatma Gandhi, who must have been the soundbite champion of the early 20th century. And think of the discussions you can have with his 7 deadly social sins. Each one is 3 words. Think of the discussions you can have with young people. Okay, here are the 7 deadly social sins. Those are his words. Politics without principle. Wealth without work. Commerce without morality. Pleasure without conscience. Education without character. Science without humanity. Worship without sacrifice. And I added 2 more. I was presumptuous enough. Belief without thought. I got this from my dad. I went home one day when I was a schoolboy, and he said to me, "What did you learn in school today? Did you learn how to believe, or did you learn how to think?" And the second one deals with the way these college kids damage their own health, binge drinking. Respect without self-respect. Respect without self-respect. So this is, and there's even a section on how to be a powerful voter. Have you ever heard that phrase, how to be a powerful voter? We have to teach civic skills in our classes. That's another mobilization for a club. You go to the schools and you say, are you teaching these students civic skills, civic history? Connect them with the community on various projects. Do you know how high schools and colleges can change Congress? They just have a course called Congress 101. And every semester, the students study the 2 senators and representative, and they disseminate everything these people do. Their votes, their committee assignments, who pays them, what they do. And suddenly, these students become the most powerful factor in the congressional office, because every semester they keep coming. They can't wear them down. Congress 101, Congress 101. Community colleges all over the country. They learn Congress in the real dynamics instead of learning it by rules, civics rules. How about the physics and chemistry class? Testing the local drinking water. Learning the protocols of testing for cadmium, lead, cesium, all the various heavy metals. They learn how to do it. They learn about the Clean Drinking Water Act, how to use it. When they graduate from school, they're functional citizens. They're not just wasting their time with test tubes that don't have any relation with their lives.
I have a very simple question for you, Mr. Nader. I'd just like to see, how do you live your philosophy in your life?
How do I what?
Live your philosophy in your life.
Practice what I preach, preach what I practice.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I have no problem. Again, blame my parents.
Yes.
Okay.
You love to talk.